Okay, let's see if I can figure out what I'm doing. Approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of May 22nd, 2012. Recommend a motion that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of May 22nd, 2012. Moved by Mrs. Brand, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. Any discussion? All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Does anybody have any committee or liaison reports? Excellent. Moving on to our next item of business is the superintendent's report. Dr. Title.
Well, I'll sort of weigh in on the graduations that were held very successfully. I was only at one of them, and several of you were at the other. And those of us at Ludlow, while we were warm, it was an excellent evening. Everybody did well. We had taken a number of precautions. People had sort of sped the ceremony along. It was the fastest I've ever heard names read at a graduation, and I think we should keep it that way. And my understanding is, and the ward one was equally festive and worked out well. And so just want to, say it's a nice way to finish the year. I also do want to point out that this is the last official board meeting for Margaret Mary Fitzgerald, who's officially retiring on Friday. So, Margaret Mary. And while he'll still be in the district, this is his last official meeting in his role as Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. Dr. Rosado, moving over to Fairfield Woods. I'm sure we'll welcome him back whenever he'd like to come. In fact, I may have a new rule that the Woods principal must come to all board meetings, just because. So with that, I will be getting updates through the summer, which I'll send to you as this whole education reform package unfolds. Week by week, I think we're going to get more details around it. I'll just keep you posted as we go through the summer, and I'll keep the blog updated as well. So that's all I have.
Next item is approval of the Board of Education Handbook. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve the Fairfield Board of Education Handbook. Moved by Mrs. Kennelly, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Kennelly.
Only very briefly, in going over it one more time, I did find a couple of just typos. I didn't think it was something that we needed to open up for discussion. I have copies of the very few edits. It's not substantive, it's not content, it's strictly capitalization, a few other things like that. But if anyone wanted to, if anyone wanted to see it before we voted, I do have copies of that, so.
Thank you. I trust in your English teaching abilities. Thank you for catching those. Anyone else? Excellent. I just want to say thank you. This has been a long time coming, and I know a lot of work for the policy committee and especially Mr. Dwyer. So thank you for biting off more than you anticipated. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, all in favor? Passes unanimously. Okie dokie. Next item, the financial report and approval of budget transfers. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve line item transfers in the amount of $255,000 for the 2011-2012 fiscal year as detailed in the financial statement enclosure number 3. Moved by Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. I see that Mrs. Munsall is here. Would you like to fill us in on your spreadsheet?
Okay. Well, we certainly wouldn't even have a need for any transfers if it weren't for some pretty significant emergency maintenance projects. As you can tell, Tom and the maintenance department have been busy. I think we've talked about all these projects. We happen to have savings in that category with the utilities between a mild winter and the savings in the electrical rates from the town bid, but not quite enough to cover that category. So we need to transfer some savings in the salary area because of things that we've talked about before with the additional retirees and that kind of thing. That's a brief summary of the highlights of it. It's a new format. I changed the format. I hope everybody likes it. It was a little easier for me to understand.
Myself included, so
Okay.
thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Mr. Fattabine?
The only question I would have is, I notice on this document that in personnel services, substitutes had a substantial deficit. And I guess I want to try and get an understanding as to why that is.
Well, with the savings up, the certified salary savings, the 519, when you have turnover, vacancies, leave of absences, that kind of thing, those positions have to be covered. Also, with the additional retirees, there's areas of long-term absence, and a great deal of that amount is to cover those kinds of salaries. They kind of offset each other.
All right.
So we had, for example, just as, without naming names, a couple people decided to retire mid-year from, certified positions. So you're going to save half a year's salary, which is going to make the certified salary line have a surplus, but you're going to hire someone to fill out the rest of the year for that position, and that's going to hit your sub line, and it's a long-term sub, so you're going to pay, maybe a premium for that. So when you have mid-year turnover, that's what happens. And Margaret Mary, I think, should jump in on some of this. Come on up to a microphone. We don't want to let you get out in your last meeting without a chance.
No, that's okay. It's not unusual at all to have a shortfall in the substitute account reduced by certified salaries where there would be a balance, and that's, as Dr. Title just talked, that would be a turnover, that would be teachers who are out on a unpaid child rearing leave or an unpaid family medical leave. Their salary we have, and that helps offset the substitute costs. I would say we've done this in past years. You may or may not have seen it because sometimes the budget transfer sheet that you'd seen at the end of the school year is compacted. This time, Mrs. Mansell has just given you a line-by-line account, but it's not at all unusual to have a shortfall in the substitute line account offset by such things as turnover, vacancies, leave of absences, and unpaid family medical leave.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mrs. Kennelly?
Actually, I had a few, starting at the top. With the non-certified salaries of $106,000, was that for the custodial overtime, was that all with the, and Mr. Cullen can correct me on the phrase used, but is that for the unreimbursable or the town use that we don't charge people for? Wouldn't be? Any idea what percentage? And sorry to hit you with this question.
Yeah.
I think what you're asking is the reservations where they don't pay a fee
Right.
or custodial overtime, is all of that. I don't believe it is.
It's a balance in that account.
Probably a percentage of it.
Right.
We could look that up.
And I guess that's where I'm curious about the amount, because that's something we've been talking about in the policy committee, and I thought this was a similar number that we'd been thinking that we were in the deficit for. And so to see such a high number, I was curious what was going into the building certainly seemed actively used. But, okay.
So we had a bigger balance in that account that was offset, right, by the deficit in the custodial overtime.
Right, custodial overtime was projected at about a negative 160, but there's also the same kind of situation where if there were turnover or long-term absences, there were savings, which offset that.
It's just a fairly significant number, and as I said, we've been talking about that in the policy committee.
Well, one more thing on that, I guess this is worth pointing out. Once we knew we were going to a different staffing model for elementary for next year, in which we were going to be reducing paraprofessionals and increasing certified staff. Really starting, I would say, February-ish, somewhere in that range, whenever we had a vacancy for a paraprofessional, we would fill that with a sub instead of hiring somebody, so that by the end of the year, we would not be in a position of having to lay people off.
Right.
And so that actually ends up saving, money there because of the turnover. So that helped as well. You wouldn't normally do that, but because we knew we were going to be reducing 20-something paras, and we actually succeeded to the point where there won't need to be any
Great.
layoffs,
Okay.
saving the town money.
Headline. And then I was also curious about the transportation number, because I sort of had the feel all year that it was costing more than we were expecting, and yet, I don't know if this is something different, but the transportation line of 77,000.
No, regular transportation came out to be around what we projected, which was like a 160,000 deficit, but special ed transportation is in there also, and changes in special ed transportation showed us a small, the savings. Also, regional transportation, there were some savings in that, which brought that number up, because
Special ed saves the day. Now, there's a headline.
Mrs. Brand?
I just wanted to say thank you. This is a tremendous amount of detail, and I do appreciate it. Thank you.
you're welcome.
We should point out that the most important number on the whole spreadsheet,
You're stealing my thunder.
okay.
No,
I
go
won't.
ahead, go. It's your thunder.
No,
I
it's
was
not
going to
my
steal it from
thunder.
you.
All right, see the bottom of the second column that says total balances, and down at the bottom it says 345, 128? That's what we estimate we'll be turning back to the town this year, at the close of the fiscal year. So even with all of the additional expenses. Again, this can change because, this is not an exact number, but this is the ballpark that we anticipate being able to turn back to the town for them to put back into the general fund because of, as you can see on there, the huge savings in electricity. That was really something that we were not aware of until the town told us they rebid the electricity till July. The additional retirees that we heard so much about, and the mild winter. Those are in combination, but the additional retirees plus the electric, really, even with all the emergencies, and getting everything we need to run the system, we feel we can turn this back to the town and help out.
So for anyone taking notes, the headline should be Board of Ed returns $345,000 to the town to help with the bottom line expenditures.
And
Mr. Dwyer?
and the subheadline should say that current year's performance does not guarantee future.
It's like a mutual fund.
Touche.
Doreen?
We don't typically, wouldn't close until the end of July, maybe beginning of August. So sometime after that, I guess at the first meeting next year.
Have an exact
And then
number.
there's final numbers when the audit's done, which is in the fall sometime.
We have to file the famous ED-001
Yep,
by
September 1.
September 1, which is that's the official number we sent it to the state of this is how much we spent last year. So there's always purchase orders that, get filled after the year ends and we have to wait and something's not in stock. So there's always this closeout. But this gives you a rough idea where we're anticipating landing.
I just want to say thank you. This could have easily gone a different direction, but you guys were right on the money, no pun intended, and thank you. You could have taken the money and spent in other areas. You didn't. You recognized the need to give it back to the town, and I think that's really important. Anybody else? Any public comment on this item? Seeing none, all in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. Next item is public comment and petitions. Anybody wish to speak to the board at this time? No one? Anything for open board comment? Mrs. Brand?
This is relative to the update that we got on the gifted program. I wanted to say first, thank you. And the following, it didn't go as planned. So I know you're making adjustments. Would it be possible to have an update or presentation, whatever you feel is appropriate, in August so that we have a sense of what's going to happen moving forward?
August might be a little soon, but I think that memo outlines what the game plan is in terms of the changes, so certainly sometime in the fall.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Liu?
Thank you. Just two things. First, just to say again about the graduation, it is my favorite part of the whole entire year and being a board member. There's nothing like watching those children, those students, become young adults, and it makes it all worthwhile. The other thing I wanted to talk about was this, the math pilot program document. Thank you for giving us one. I have to say, though, I'm disappointed because of what I think a pilot program should be from the research that I have done. To me, this doesn't seem like a pilot program. This seems to me to be a bunch of test results. Everything that I understand from a pilot program is you have a written document that states the intent, who was included, control groups, instructional models, training time spent with staff training, the methodology and comparison, feedback from staff and students and parents, conclusions and recommendations. And that's not in here. It's not even close. So I put that out there, but I do think it is something that brings me back to what I discussed or brought up at the last meeting, which was I think this board needs to be more actively involved with how curriculums are set out to be done, and that we should be at least a part of them and be updated along the way on how they're going and what they're being done and what's being done about them. I think this is really important since it's one of our major things that we do, and since we approve curriculum, I think we should have more of a sense in what's going on and how these curriculums are being put together, how the pilot programs are being handled, so that when we finally sign off on them, we can know 100% that we've done our due diligence.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mrs. Brand?
Would it be possible for you to, Dr. Title, if there is going to be a pilot study, to let the board know so that we can have a follow-up to see how it went? Because I think then it validates our decision with any kind of curriculum changes that are necessary, or the following curriculum that comes up. I just think it helps guide us before we even get there. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. I will entertain a motion that the Board of Education convene to executive session to discuss the superintendent evaluation. Moved by Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. All in favor? It's unanimous. We are going to move to executive session. I would just ask that the public please leave the room. We are now back in public session. Do I have to read this other? Right. Do I have to read this other thing? No? Okay.
Thank you.
I need a motion to add an item to the agenda. Moved by Mr. Dwyer, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. All in favor? Unanimous. The next recommended motion is that I need a motion to pay a performance bonus as outlined in number 2B of the superintendent's contract dated July 1st, 2011, in the amount of $12,500. Moved by Mr. Convertito, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, do I go to the public on this? No, I don't think so. Personnel issue. Voting in favor, Mrs. Kennelly, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Iacono, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattabine. Any opposed? Mr. Liu and Mrs. Brand. Motion carries. I need a motion that the Board of Education approve an employment contract with the Superintendent of Schools from July 1st, 2012 to June 30th, 2015. Moved by Mr. Dwyer, seconded by Mrs. Kennelly. And I will also entertain a motion to amend the motion to add the following wording, with a 2% salary increase and a performance bonus up to $12,500 pursuant to number 2B of the superintendent's contract. Moved by Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. Any discussion? Mrs. Brand?
On this motion, I will not be supporting the amendment. I do fully support the extension of the contract without the amendment with the additional funds. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor? Voting in favor, Mrs. Kennelly, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Iacono, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattabine. Opposed? Mr. Liu, Mrs. Brand. Motion carries. Main motion as amended, that the Board of Education approve an employment contract with the Superintendent of Schools from July 1st, 2012 to June 30th, 2015, with a 2% salary increase and a performance bonus of up to $12,500 pursuant to number 2B of the Superintendent's contract. All in favor? Voting in favor, Mrs. Kennelly, Mr. Convertito, Mrs. Gerber, Ms. Iacono, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fattabine. Opposed? Mrs. Brand and Mr. Liu. Motion carries. Congratulations, Dr. Title. Thank you for leading our district, and we welcome and are happy to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Board. Appreciate it. I really enjoy working here, and I look forward to fulfilling all the terms of the contract. Thank you.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mrs. Brand, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you, and have a good night.